Can you hear me, Frank?
Now I hear you.
How are you? Oh, gorgeous. Are you
Okay.
based in DC?
I'm in DC. Yeah, that's the place. That's the new place.
Amazing.
By the way, we're on. So now the world knows that I live in an amazing place.
You live
Uh,
in many amazing places, but you deserve it. You've earned every dollar that you've gotten.
okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't think the IRS agrees, and there are a few people on Twitter that I know don't agree. So there are people joining us right now. Kellyanne, you and I have known each other for 36
Four,
years,
34
34
years,
years.
1986.
Incredible.
I've been based since I was 19 years old and I'm 53. Yes.
Because you realize how bad that sounds now. So you have
No,
to
it sounds
emphasize.
great. I met you at the Oxford Union. I was an undergrad and you were getting your doctorate at Oxford University. And I met you at the Oxford Union, and Boris Johnson, now the Prime Minister of the UK, was also a student there.
Yeah. What debate was that? Was there a debate on that
No, it
night?
wasn't a debate. No, no, it was, I think it was more a social encounter. It wasn't a debate. I think that the program I was in was trying to assimilate some of the Americans with some of the British students, and then also introduced us to some of the Americans like you and Peter Floca, still our friend, to make us feel at home. I mean, we were 19 years old and there were eight of us. So
So honestly, and I do this because it's a very personal opportunity. It gives me the chance to engage people in a way that normally they're not known. Um, and we'll get in the ways that you are known in a second, but doesn't it make you feel old? It makes me feel very old that it was so long ago.
it makes you feel seasoned and mature. How's that? Do we really have a choice? It's better than all the alternatives, Frank. I mean, I love you personally, and you survived a stroke. So there it is. There we are. And by the way, we look so much better now. I know you posted this. Frank posted this side by side picture on the night that President Trump delivered his acceptance speech at the White House back in August of this year, Frank. And you said that's us in 1988 at the Bush during the Bush Dukakis conventions. I think in New Orleans, my first Republican convention, and you're the one who brought me there. And then on the right hand side is us this year, and people are asking, wow, you look better now, but they have to understand 1980s hair for both of us. And I just discovered contouring, concealer, and keratin since then.
Well, I
But you're
think
still the same Frank. You were the same Frank then as you are now. A year after that, you helped me get an $8 a year job at the Worthland Group. Dick Worthland, God rest his soul, Ronald Reagan's pollster at what was the end of the Reagan years. And for $8 an hour in the summer to learn the craft, at the knees of the master, Dick Worthland, and people like Neil Newhouse and Bill McInturf. And you lost that job. Few people know the following year, later that year, you lost your job, and it was very painful. And I said to you, God closes one door and opens another, and you made a crack, but let me just say that they opened up an entire series of doors for you, and it was great. I think you went on to do the mayoral race in New York City that year. You went on to get the New York Post as a client. You went on to get international clients, and the rest really is a 31-year history of FIL Inc.
so. I have a litany. I don't have that much that I regret. And in fact, I'm pretty satisfied with the decisions that I made. Some of them I might tweak now. Of all the things that you've done, of all the people that you've worked for, and your accomplishments with so many successful Republican campaigns, senators, congressmen, people elected president. We'll get into that. Is there anything that you would do differently? And let's slow down. Let's try to pretend that it's just us, because we've had these conversations, or we used to have these conversations. Um, when you look back on it, is there anything that you said, I wish I hadn't done? Because in my case, it's not the stuff that I did, it's the stuff that I didn't do that I regret.
That's a great question. For me, it would probably be not asserting myself more, believe it or not, early on in my career, my solo career, after I left your company and went out on my own June 1st, 1995. Much like when I left the White House voluntarily earlier this year, Frank, I left you voluntarily and on great terms.
How do you know the dates? How do you?
Because I can't draw anything. I have no artistic skills whatsoever. So whatever capacious part of the brain, and including the female brain, knows depth perception, spatial relationships, and art, and any type of art, frankly. Whatever capacious part of the brain would usually be committed there. I used to remember dates and names and faces and people's kids' names and their spouse's name and their birth dates and their license plates and whatnot. And you taught me to be good with numbers. But seriously speaking, I think I regret not asserting myself more early on in my career when people were, I call them the eye rollers and the wrist flickers, like, oh, here she comes again. Let's throw her a focus group here or an analysis there, and never really letting me compete for the big jobs. I don't feel sorry for myself at all. So my regret is not the way they treated me and excluded me. My regret is me not asserting myself, a younger me not asserting myself the way maybe I would have later on. And you know my background, you know the wonderful the unconventional house I was raised in. I call it South Jersey's version of the Golden Girls. My mom, her mom, two of my mom's unmarried sisters, very self-denying women. And I think I carried that through in the first parts of my career. I remember being invited to give a speech in 1996, and they called my office, and it was a speaking agency that we both know. And they called and they literally said, hey, this, I won't mention, but this significant, well-heeled association has requested you by name. They requested Mark Mellman, a Democratic pollster, obviously a man by name. And the speech is on September 28th, 1996, at the Mayflower Hotel, which I can see outside the window of my office. And you're each going to speak for 20 minutes. It's lunchtime. Of course, you're invited to stay for lunch, and then you'll take questions together for 20 minutes. Are you available? And I'm looking through, I mean, this is 1996, so there's no internet. We're not hardly doing the internet. And I'm looking through the master calendar. And I said, yes, I'm available, this being June or July. So I marked it down. And he said, you have an agent. And I joked, I nervously joked, why would I have an agent? I sometimes ask my mom or my dog what I should do. Ha ha, why should I have an agent? Pretty unprofessional, very glib, but very nervous, really. And then he dropped the bomb. He said, what is your speaking fee? And I froze because I knew no matter what I had said, I wasn't going to know my value, know my worth. I was going to undercut myself. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't Mark Mellon's fault. It wasn't the association's fault. It wasn't really anybody's fault, but I was raised to be very self-denying. And I knew whatever price I assigned to my value that they had already identified and elevated by inviting me to give this speech, I was going to undercut myself. So I got a little nervous because before I went to law school and I knew free speech was taught in constitutional law, and it was about the First Amendment, free speech was always, let's call Kellyanne and she'll give us one. She'll give us a free speech. So I took a line out of When Harry Met Sally and I said, I'll have what he's having. And he said, what? And I said, well, I'll just have whatever Mark asked for. You said he already committed. He already locked it in. He already signed the paperwork. And they said to me in 1996, okay, well, Mark requested $3,500 net. Would that be okay with you? And I said, that'll be just fine. And I hung up the phone and I fell to the ground. It was all I can do to keep it together because I just thought that's an enormous amount of money. And I know me, I would have said, no, you're going to give me lunch. That's enough. Why don't you give my speaking fee to Mark too? And so I learned over time, I think that was a regret early on because it probably cost me business, but it also built a lot of goodwill with people. People liked working with somebody who was accessible and worked hard and seemed a little counter-conventional.
Okay,
And maybe,
so
and I
some
tell you what I don't regret though. I don't regret leaving money on the table when there were clients who came a calling whose philosophies and policies I did not agree with. And I know a lot of people do take that money because they say, after all, we're just a pollster. We're plastic, we're plastic surgeons. We can't guarantee which nose will look like. We just do the surgery. Ha ha ha. But if you're doing the surgery in an operating room or on a patient with which you disagree or that your heart's not into it, then you shouldn't do it. And so that's something I don't regret, is leaving a lot of money on the table.
So you got $3,500 back in 1996. If someone on this call calls you now, what's your fee?
Well, they'll have to ask that and negotiate it, of course. It's not $3,500, but you'd be surprised because it's something I love to do. I think when you speak, you're telling a great story and you're taking questions. But I'm a prepared person. So I've always listened to people speak and they say, I'm only going to speak briefly because I'm really here to listen to what you have to say. And I'm thinking, well, that's not why they paid you. But it's always great. And, the book that I'm doing now will have an awful lot. I'm a pretty good storyteller. I've lived a very humble life before I, quote, made it to the big time. Donald Trump plucked me. I was hiding in plain sight in the Republican consultancy, not at the age of 29 or even 39, Frank, but at 49. And I had worked really hard, step by step, tap, tap, tap over the years, but never had my shot at the big one. And those who had their shot at the big one, who are still gnawing at my ankles many years later and never succeeded at that level for some odd reason, it was Donald Trump who saw something different and gave me a chance that I never had otherwise. And it worked out, didn't it? He got elected, and we had a great team. Many people deserve that credit, mostly him. But I basically, the day he asked me to be campaign manager, just the two of us, August 12th, 2016, I'm a great secret keeper, and it wasn't revealed for 4 or 5 more days. And I asked him if I can have 3 things as the campaign manager, if he could agree to 3 things. He agreed to them on the spot, almost to the point where I couldn't believe it, Frank, because I had pitched that and sort of urged that and gently suggested it in some degree to the other campaigns over time. And nobody ever wanted to do that. And I think it's because even those who say I'm not a typical politician are admitting implicitly they're some kind of politician. And he wasn't that. You know this, Frank, because you're a polling expert. Americans had said for years, if not decades, I want somebody who has a ton of experience, who's never been involved in politics. It's like, well, who's that going to be? And it turned out it was a businessman who, was 1 for 1 in terms of running for president the first time. So I credit him with doing that. And I think when history says Kellyanne was the first woman to successfully manage a presidential campaign, they have to complete the sentence. It has to say, comma, and Donald Trump put her there. And I'm one of the very few people who left his White House on his or her own terms, with a good relationship with the president and others in the White House. And I did it for reasons that had nothing to do with my job. I did it for reasons that every mom, really most parents, but every mom out there can relate to, which is teens and tweens who are, for the second school year in a row, learning online, learning virtually. And my kids are privileged. They go to great private schools. They have resources if they need it, thank God, but it doesn't really matter. They're your kids. And I was always there for my kids, but I decided I needed to be there more with them physically as they navigated this very strange time. It's strange for all of us. 2020 has been a terrible year in so many ways, but I think especially for so many of these kids who were creating a pandemic within a pandemic for so many of them.
So one of the producers, you've now raised so many questions, and I've got a very eclectic group of people that's watching you. And
Frank, do you know how to play the piano in the background, or is it just for looks? I'm curious.
It's on there is a picture of my mom and dad.
I knew them. I knew Dr. Lester Luntz and Phyllis Luntz, and I even knew she spelled her name with 2 Y's. Am I right?
Yes, you are.
I have great pictures of all of us at the inauguration of Pedro Rosselló to be governor of Puerto Rico. I mean, we're going way back, right? And then his son was governor. That's how old we are. But I've got great pictures because back in the day, the pictures were on your phone. You had to go get them developed. So I'll whip them out the next time I'm on your show.
As long as that's all that you whip out, we'll be fine.
Right.
Don't you remember?
I do, but that had nothing to do with you or me. And I really don't know that you want to tell that story. Maybe I'll put it in the book. It was harrowing. But that was there too.
In what city? In what city?
In Jerusalem.
There you go.
In Jerusalem.
That is one of my favorite stories.
2 weeks in 1988, right before the Intifada, for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe we were there for 3 weeks, at the Commodore Hotel in Tel Aviv, I was known as Mrs. Luntz. Because Frank, everyone on this call should know that before I met the man who then became my husband, I spent more time alone in a hotel room with any man. That you were the man I spent the most time alone in the hotel room, and always platonic, of course, like brother and sister. But you were too cheap to get me my own room when we were working on projects and when I worked for you. And that's how you're able to afford these 4 condos put together in DC, that magnificent house in Los Angeles, the great one on Lorraine Street in McLean, and so many other things, Las Vegas and New York and everything you've earned. But people should know it's also because you were too cheap to get me my own room. But we used to laugh, and you said, you have your own bed. Why do you need your own room? I know everybody's blanching now hearing that. They feel right. It was great. It was great. And remember the time that we were late we missed the last flight because we were late from the focus groups in New York to get back to DC, and we had to stay at a hotel all the way out in Queens. You were so angry with me, and we watched Forrest Gump. I remember that on the TV. But anyway, you were great to me, and you taught me at these conventions. We went to Israel to help the Likud party. It's where I first met Benjamin Netanyahu. In 1988, I was so young. I was 21 years old, and you brought me with you, and I assisted you, certainly. You were the mastermind behind it, really helping to introduce Western techniques to the Israeli elections for the Likud party, but also polling at that time was going door by door, door to door. And you learned a lesson by studying the Nicaraguan elections when the Sandinistas would show up at somebody's house and ask the woman of the household, who are you voting for? And she would say, well, of course, I'm voting for um, the Sandinistan candidate. And we learned then that you have to make people feel comfortable to tell you that maybe they're not going to do what they tell you they're going to do. And that's been an incredible difference, I think, in our polling versus other people's polling, which is you have to make people feel comfortable to admit to you how they're actually going to vote.
I want to, okay, so Michelle Jordan says, what are the three things you've left me? I've got 10 questions, 10 follow-ups now. The first one's from Michelle Jordan. What were the three things that you insisted from Trump that he gave you?
Well, they're going to be in my book. I've talked a little bit about them before, but I'll tell you, I'll give you a brief synopsis of them. I told him, because he was not leading in the polls. It was after the two conventions, and there was no question he could still beat Hillary Clinton for president, but the window was closing. And the three things were that I told him I believed her blue wall was real. I just believed it was real for a Democratic candidate. That if we can focus on the 10 or 12 states that Obama Biden, here comes the key to 2020, Obama Biden carried twice with over 50% of the vote, but where Hillary was not at 50% and staying there in any legitimate poll. And important part, thirdly, Frank and Michelle, where a Republican had been elected statewide to senator and or governor in those states. So we're not talking about Oregon or California or Washington State. We're talking about Nevada, Colorado, New Hampshire, three states we ended up losing, but Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, Florida, North Carolina, the first time for President Obama and Vice President Biden. And so it really opened up in Indiana the first time they won it. So it opened up, and he said, well, okay, that makes sense. And I said, the second thing is, and it's related, is that people focus on electability. The three magic words that have been a death knell for so many really good Republican candidates up and down the ballot have been, you can't win. Frank can't win. Kellyanne can win. She can win. He can't win. He can win. She can't win. And Frank, they say it early on, years and years before a single vote is cast. He can win. He can't win. Well, how do you know that? So electability pretends that I know if you can or can't win. Electoral college is how you do or don't win. And I told him that he was so bold in the way he had structured his movement, not even a campaign, but in the way he had structured a movement and made people feel like they were part of it, that he had the courage and the lack of conventionality to put aside electability, which he had already busted through. Everybody said he couldn't win the primaries, and he did, and focus on electoral college. And so we did that. And the third thing was to balance out that the election was mainly about him at that point. And I said, if it could be more about her, or mostly about her, she'll have a hard time winning. Because the Washington Post ABC poll at the time said 62% of Americans thought that she was neither honest nor trustworthy. And I looked at it and I thought, well, what could possibly follow the but? How do you say, I don't think she's honest or trustworthy, but I'm going to vote for her, or but I'm comfortable. So I think people were looking for an excuse to vote against Hillary and a reason to vote for Trump. And in trying to balance out the coverage, there was this obsessiveness with Donald Trump, the candidate. And if every day is a referendum on you, it's harder to win if you can make it a choice between the two of you. And that's what ended up happening. But he allowed that to happen. What I did as campaign manager was try to find what the sparks and the magic were in the primary, but also what made him most comfortable as a candidate, and see how we can fit that into a general election strategy. There were things that he wanted to do that he can no longer do as much of because he had Secret Service, because the days were more limited, because he was now the nominee. And there were other things that he had to do. He had to go get the security and intelligence brief. He had to prepare for debates. He had to, there were things that you just have to do as a nominee. And so he probably had to, he had to raise money for the first time. And so we were able to do that. And I will go into greater detail, but I have to tell you, Donald Trump agreed to them like that. And that was the most non-conventional, non-typical politician thing that he could have done.
So Harry Clark, who you may know, who has been very instrumental in teaching me how to sell, probably the best salesman that I've ever met in my professional life. He asked you, how do you think history is going to treat your former boss?
The industry?
No, how history.
Oh, history, excuse me. The history, actually history, which isn't now, history does not exist on Twitter or Instagram. History is not today, tomorrow, or tonight's cable argument, or tomorrow's podcast, history will treat the Trump presidency better than it's being treated now, and better than he is being treated now. Because if you think of what Donald Trump was able to do domestically and internationally, it's a big deal that he's the first president in modern time to not bring us into a new war, not engage us in a new war. It's a big deal that President Trump was the first president to actually keep the commitment and the promise of 8 presidents, beginning with Jimmy Carter, to move the US Embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, to stand up to nuclear capable countries like Iran, also a threat to Israel, to have created a net number of manufacturing jobs, to bring back industries and the individuals who work in them, bring them back from outsourced jobs, overseas jobs, these 5 trade deals with China, with Korea, with Japan, certainly with Mexico and Canada. They're incredibly significant, and they outlive his president. They will survive his presidency. The president has a historic number of judicial appointments, and people are going to say, no, Carter had more. Folks, this is what I'm trying to say. In August, there was a headline that for the first time in about 30 or 40 years, there were no vacancies on any circuit court. President Obama and Vice President Biden left President-elect Trump with 118 vacancies. I have no idea why. Even if you think Hillary Clinton is going to be the next president, why not fill those vacancies over the course of your 8 years? And yes, I know Mitch McConnell did his job too, but the way this president has transformed a co-equal branch of the government that people don't pay as much attention to is truly remarkable and historic. Most people did very well during the Trump administration, the economy. And I think when people look back in totem, particularly at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, Frank and Harry, and they see that this president joining with Congress to sign a multi-trillion-dollar CARES Act, the PPP, the billions of pieces of PPE, working with each state's governor, regardless of their political affiliation, who really cares, getting private sector America to repurpose their assembly lines or their manufacturing facilities, their factories to help produce, working with the G7 and G20 leaders. In the first week or two, making sure that 105 million school children across this country had their lunches and their breakfasts that they normally would be supplied for them at school, to make sure they had access to them was very important. So there were so many things that were happening, particularly at the beginning of COVID-19. And then, of course, at the end of this year, we have vaccines. You know, Frank and Harry, in less time than it takes to have a baby, believe me, from the promise of development to the first people getting the shot in the arm was about this amount of time it would take to have a baby. That's called Operation Warp Speed for a reason. There's a reason that even people like Senator Dick Durbin, high-ranking Democratic senator from Illinois, just this week credited President Trump with showing leadership in getting this done. So I think the development of therapeutics and the vaccines will all be part of his history. And it's very difficult to judge people at that moment, particularly when we're in a divided country, and particularly when people have been so venomous and punishing and unrelenting in not just their criticism of President Trump, because that's America. We were founded on conflict. And Thomas Jefferson said opinion is power, and we ought to respect that. But just not just unrelenting and so punishing, but also just so, at times, just so nasty, so gratuitously mean and nasty. And I think that all the calls for unity, I hope they're genuine, but they seem to come from people who practically last week were, accusing the president of taking the wings off of butterflies.
So you started talking about your family and the reason why you stepped aside. And I use you as someone who I think to myself, how would I answer if I got the same questions you got, if I had to put up with what you had to put up with, because I know you so well, I would think to myself, what would I say in that situation? And frankly, I could not have handled it. I would have quit. I would have quit so many times. How do you, I cannot imagine what it's like, because you care about your kids. You care about your family. And I just want, because some people, and even a few people who I've invited to these calls can say things that really do bother me. How do you deal with your kids? They find stuff online. They read these mean comments. How do you get through the day?
I appreciate that. First of all, it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's necessary to separate life online and life offline. And Frank, if I can share with everyone today the major trend, and I should say major division in this country that doesn't get enough coverage. We certainly talk about political differences and racial differences and ideological and socioeconomic and geographic and gender differences. We do this all the time. What we don't talk as much about is the difference between people who mostly, I mean predominantly now, even pre-pandemic, live their life online versus people who mostly live their life offline. And so, as somebody who just appreciates living her life offline, where it tastes and smells and looks and feels better and it's more real, I can't let people who live most of their life online to help to define me to myself, and certainly not to my children. They do read mean things, but just saying something doesn't make it true. Because it appears on Twitter or on Instagram doesn't make it true. And my
So
middle
your
daughter learned
kids,
that lesson. Go ahead.
so your kids would actually come and say, Mom, and they would read to you what they were reading.
Yes, my middle daughter, particularly, who's very sensitive, she was 8 at the time, and that's really young, folks. And mommy, why would people say this about you? And she actually recognized the name of the person who had said something about me that week as somebody who had been very warm and inviting and couldn't get enough of me on, I'll just say, his or her TV show during the campaign. And that's because people loved having a race. They loved having somebody who can articulate a message, and they had known for a long time and knew polling and was willing to come on. And they liked having a competitive race to cover, but nobody expected Donald Trump to win. That wasn't part of the bargain of being solicitous and kind, all during the campaign. And so she did recognize this person's name as somebody who had been nice about her mother in the past, and asked what had changed or why would they say that. And I said, I don't know, you'd have to ask that person that. But do you think mommy is X, or do you think Frank is Y? And no, well then, okay. So you know what? I've taught my kids, on the one hand, you got to pray for some of these people, not the well-known ones who, are have good lives. You've got to pray for people who you wonder to yourself, Frank, what in God's name can make people so miserable to attack a stranger they've never met? And how does that make you feel better about what's probably your pathetic life? I also would point out the sort of thin-skinned glass house nature of many of the better known people who attacked me. They can't, if I ever responded in kind, and I didn't because I was in the White House and I'm a public servant and I was working for the country, and I learned that the hard way, that there are only certain things that you can do and say and appropriate in that role. But I'm liberated now, so we'll see what happens, as Donald Trump would say.
Is there,
And
is there any journalist, and I know you'll call them out in the book, but is there any
I don't know if
journalist,
they're worth the column inches, but go ahead.
that gave you particular hell that made it really difficult? Now, not just for you, but for your family?
Yes, there are. And I'm not going to give them the credit and the platform here by naming them, because they're not equal to my kids in my heart, or really in this life. My kids are classier. My kids are more dignified. My kids will be more polite, um, heartful people. But I wanted to say something else that I tell young people all the time, beginning with my own children, but I tell young women particularly. No one, I mean, no one can make you feel badly without your permission. And so far, I haven't granted it to anyone. And that doesn't mean I can't take constructive criticism. That doesn't mean I'm not aware of my flaws. But the idea that my family was ever anyone's business because I work in the White House is folly. The premise is flawed. And uh, what's so ironic, Frank? You asked about reporters and journalists. They all have agents. I didn't have an agent. I was working in the White House on a government salary as a public figure. I ran away from, I was running toward, I slinked away from, I should say, I slinked away from a gold mine of life-changing proportions. And you know that because you helped me make my decisions along the way as my friend. And you came and we talked many times over the course of the last 4 years as friends. And you're someone who knew me when, so I trust you. But I got to tell you that I these people all have agents. They all want to be public figures. They give speeches for a lot of money. They get book deals for a lot of money. They're the public figures, actually. I was the public servant. So should I be talking about their marriages? Should I be talking about their unusual habits? Should I be talking about their children? I didn't do any of that because someone has to be the bigger person. And I'm a sinner. I'm a flawed person who both grants mercy and seeks mercy. I learned that in relationship with my own father, God rest his soul, as you know. Our whole story is about second chances and redemption. I met him, left when I was 3. I met him when I was 12. And then we had a 40-year, very present, loving relationship until he passed away earlier this year, close to your birthday. And so when people read me in comments, it's also, I think that I'm trying to teach my children also, you have a decision to make. You may think it's really tough to be on the receiving end of those comments, but your life's going to be very tough if you happen to be one of the people who's writing those comments, because you'll be angry and you'll be frustrated and you'll think that's real. You'll think that somehow that elevates you because you're pushing someone else down. And, particularly with my teenage daughter, who's, has a big following on social media, I gave her a piece of advice that a consultant you and I both know gave me. Talk about naive. He was in my office in February 2017 on official business, and my phone was on the coffee table. And he said, "Are those your Twitter notifications?" And I said, "What?" He said, "The Bluebird says," like, I said, "I know, I get thousands of them." He said, "Why?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't know." And he said, No, why do you look at them?" He grabbed my phone. I put in the password. He turned off my notifications. Frank, I haven't had them on since. It changed my life. And I'm also trying to tell my kids that, because if you read the comments, 2 things could happen to you. Either all the praise gives you way too much hubris, where you need humility, not hubris, and all the criticism just really makes you feel very badly about yourself. And folks, this isn't a joke. There are kids out there who harm themselves and do an awful lot worse because of what total strangers say to them. Kill yourself, you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're a drunk, you're no good, you're poor, you're trash. And kid, I mean, years ago, somebody said that on the playground, or somebody said, "Oh, did you hear what somebody said about you?" And you couldn't really verify, you get on with your life. It's very much similar to what everybody on this call who has kids understands too, which is that, or grandkids, which is this whole FOMO, fear of missing out. I mean, I'm 53, Frank, right? We're in our 50s. If I wasn't invited to a sleepover at somebody's house on a Saturday night, I had no idea. It wasn't on Instagram. It didn't pop up on Facebook. I didn't see that I was less than. Maybe somebody mentioned it on Monday, but I would have a great Saturday night, a great Sunday, and not even know it. Now it's immediate, instantaneous, self-devaluing. And we have to think about that.
So what is it like? Because there's no one, I can see who's here, and there's no one who's lived their life in the public fishbowl more than you, of the people on this call. And that includes your colleagues, and a few of them are on this call. You were very public, very supportive. I'm going to read you something from David Grizzle. She is so gracious and dignified. He's commenting about you right now. And in this way, unlike the president, how did she avoid cognitive dissonance working so closely with the president? Don't answer that. I just want you to hear how the reaction that people are having to you. But what is it like to live in the middle of a fishbowl when your kids are actually coming up to you and telling you how horrible this is?
Well, I don't want to overstate that. My kids have had a great life. It was hard on them because they moved to Washington. George wanted to change his career, and he had a great opportunity to do that with accepting a nomination from President Trump for a very big job, heading up the civil division of the Justice Department, a really big job. And he loved Washington. He always wanted to move to Washington. We did that as a family. I could never do that without doing it as a family. But he pretty much, he was driving that train for a while, because remember, Donald Trump won in November 9th, 2016, offered me the press secretary job. Within an hour, we were back on the phone. And many jobs after that. I wasn't announced and going to the White House, Frank, until December 22nd, 6 or 7 weeks later, because I was struggling to decide if this was the right move for my family. I had different considerations and equities involved than maybe some of the men. That's not an anti-men or feminist statement. That's just a reality statement. Moms have to think about the kids in school and taking them away from the only friends and only home they've ever known, and all these opportunities in Washington. But we were happy to do that as a family. We bought a significant house in Washington. We put the kids in new schools. And so I don't want to overstate. So all of that was transformative for the children, for the family. But my kids have a great life. And They know how loved they are and how blessed they are. And they can tune some of that out and just have a normal childhood. I think what was difficult for me, if there was any naivete for me, it's because I wasn't born into this. I worked with people, and we both know people, Frank, who their parents, or they come from a pedigree, they come from a line, they went to Ivy League schools, they're Ivanka Trump is very poised and brilliant, and so accomplished and so visionary, and in large part because she is naturally, but she also just has this great experience and seasoning as Donald Trump's daughter, as an executive at the Trump organization. Sarah Huckabee is Mike Huckabee's daughter. She lived in the governor's mansion for, I think it was 11 years or so. He started out as lieutenant governor, being elevated, and then running on his own. And so they've forged these fantastic careers independent of their fathers, and they're amazing mothers of multiples also. And they're my friends. But I didn't have what they had in terms of a head start in seeing what it's like and being able to tap into past experiences. Like, okay, how did you deal with this being a teenage daughter of the governor or the business mogul? What did you do? I wasn't the teenage daughter of a business mogul. So we're learning as we go along. And my kids just always know, first and foremost, they're loved and they should have a normal life. I'm also really blessed, and many of them. You've known them over years. I have practically every friend I ever made. These days, maybe not, but yes, I have almost every friend I ever made, but particularly the ones from my childhood and from high school and from college and from law school. These are my sisters. And in addition to a wonderful family. And that matters to the kids too, because they call them all aunt and they look up to them. So I don't want to overstate it. My kids don't live online, they live offline. And that's what's important.
Several people have been commenting how gracious you are. It was hard to be gracious during the last 4 years. And I think that when people will comment to me about this conversation, they're going to say, this is incredible. She's incredible. But I didn't get this impression of her over the last 4 years. Is that fair? Did the media put you in a certain light that made it impossible to communicate this way?
Is it fair? I stopped asking what was fair a long time ago. I'd say it's typical and somewhat pedestrian. What I think is people should go back and look at some of my driveway gaggles or some of the things I did as part of my portfolio. So about a year ago to the day, people can pull it up. I'm sure that it's probably on whitehouse.gov somewhere. I was part of the mental health summit that we had at the White House. And I sat with, I think, Jim Carroll, the head of ONDCP, and Secretary Carson HUD, who also is, of course, first was known as a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon, obviously a doctor. And I spoke with no nets and no notes about mental health and about what we were doing as part of the administration on it. And very few people probably watched it, but I remember people saying, oh my goodness, I didn't know you were doing that. I didn't know the White House was doing that. Tell us more. So, but wouldn't it have been nice if one of the mainstream media stations had wanted to cover that at all? And so my criticism about everything you're saying, or my pushback on everything you're saying, would be this: it wouldn't be how you treated me, it would be how you treated America. Because my objection was not always biased coverage. My objection was incomplete coverage. And so when I did decide to go into the White House, some of my famous comment at the time was, look, the media and the White House are going to have joint custody of the country for the next 4 to 8 years. And we ought to find a way to responsibly co-parent. And I meant that. But I think the incomplete coverage, Frank, I think the fact that people don't realize the most significant, consequential, far-reaching bipartisan legislation that passed while Donald Trump was president was the Support Act, HR 6, which was 50 different bills put together. Usually if you start adding bills up, you lose support. We gain support because everybody felt that their bill made it into it. What was the Support Act? It's the single most comprehensive, consequential piece of drug legislation in our nation's history. And do you know every single Democrat voted for it? Every single Democrat who ran against Donald Trump voted for it. Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, they all voted for it because everybody looks at their state and their districts and says, we're included in this poly drug crisis. And we have billions of dollars more for treatment and recovery, for prevention, education, for law enforcement interdiction, holding China's feet to the fire on fentanyl, and making sure kids know that street drug your friend just handed you, you don't know what the chain of custody is. It could be laced with fentanyl, And you who spent 3 hours in the gym working out and juicing and won't eat anything that has more than two ingredients in it, don't eat that pill. And so something as simple as accessible as that. And so I think that, when you say, why did the media put her in this light? I think it was fun for some of them. I don't watch a lot of late night TV, but people would send me clips. And, I noticed that the laugh track was really strong for a while, and then it kind of petered out because it's like, okay, didn't we do this enough already? And how many times are you going to make fun of someone you don't know? And by the way, how does it even qualify as comedy? But I'll say this, I'll give you this example. If people go back and watch Saturday Night Live
Good.
during the campaign,
I was
and then
just,
after he won,
the record, I just put that down. That was going to be the
did I
next
say
question.
milk, butter, eggs, Saturday Night Live? So I have to say, Saturday Night Live was charming to basically the president and those around him, and certainly me. Kellyanne Conway's day off was hysterical. My cousin called me and said, I feel like somebody followed you around with a camera for 2 weeks. Like, that was so you. And it was like me trying to make waffles for the kids and try to get a little exercise in and spend time with my friends and be in the grocery store. But Jake Tapper's calling me back to the studio because Donald Trump's tweeting things. So I have to keep going back to the studio. It was very funny. It was very charming. Then he wins and it just becomes mean. It became meaner because remember what I said, part of the bargain was he's not going to win. So that just upended everything. But look, I think people should have some introspection, shouldn't they? Because we've had two presidential elections in a row where the so-called prognosticators predicted wrongly, where the so-called political professionals got it upside down. I said to Chris Wallace on his Sunday show on January 29th, 2017, so 9 days after we got there, I said to him, look, if the media or the political, and it's not an anti-media thing, it was an observation. If this were truly run like if the political, I think the Republican consultancy has been a walking RICO violation for years, more about that in the book. But if that was a true competitive business, if the media were run like a true competitive business, the C-suite would be cleaned out. The consumers would go to a different place. The shareholders would have revolted. In other words, the people who are in charge of predicting these things, not the media at large. And yet nobody lost their job. Not a single person lost their job. Some of them got promoted. And then here they were again, getting it wrong again. The same people who said Hillary Clinton's leading Donald Trump nationally by 12 points, the same polls said that Donald Trump was losing to Joe Biden by 17 points in Wisconsin. Now, I got to tell you something. I would have had the same objection to that poll, Frank, if it had said Donald Trump was leading Joe Biden by 17 points in Wisconsin, for a very simple reason. No presidential candidate is leading the other one by 17 points in Wisconsin. And you know that. That's the whole point of it being a swing state. That's the whole point of Donald Trump being the first Republican to win it since 1984. When I won the Washington Post Crystal Ball Award in 2004, and the only reason I won it was because I was pregnant with twins and I had all whatever those extra hormones are, I'm sure, that make you think a little bit more clearly. I'm going to get rid of that. Sorry. Oh, dear.
Great song.
Yeah, I don't even know how to get back to you. So annoying. So Frank, what I want to say about that is, oh my God, so annoying. I don't even know how to get rid of it. Are we there?
Yeah, you're still on.
Oh, do you see me?
Yeah, we see you. You're
good. I don't see you, which is fine. I don't see you, which is fine.
That is
I know.
the worst.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to say about it.
You should have had a better phone ring. Your phone ring is awful. Change your phone ring.
It is awful. I don't even know how to do that. I'd have to ask one of the kids to do it. But what I wanted to say to you is, when I won it, I got 2 states wrong. And the states I got wrong in 2004 out of the 50 states were Wisconsin and New Mexico. I gave Wisconsin to George W. Bush, and I gave Mexico to John Kerry. And I got those wrong. And I learned a lot about those 2 states afterwards. So my point is, there should be no poll that's ever released that anybody gives any credibility to that shows Joe Biden or Donald Trump up by 17 points in Wisconsin. But there's no recrimination. Nobody's saying, what are we going to do to improve polling? How do we get it so wrong? And see, this is where I think in Donald Trump's post-presidency, he has so many options, because there was no early night, there was no blue wave, there was no rebuke, let alone repudiation of Trump and all things Trump. The Republicans flipped 2 state legislatures. It's the first time Democrats haven't done that in a very long time, gained any state legislatures, won a governorship. The House majority for the Democrats now is hanging by a thread. Our friend and leader, Kevin McCarthy, the Republicans are poised to win the majority next time. The Senate is still in Republicans' hands and should stay so after these runoff elections, which I know you and I are joining in Georgia soon. So again, then there's all this, everybody makes an excuse. And I think we all have an interest in getting polling right, because polling is the last touchstone we have to what people otherwise have little visibility and very little voice. It's the last touchstone we have to that. And people, as you know, they want to participate in focus groups. They want to be heard. And Donald Trump mainstreamed that. He made people who were forgotten not feel like they were irredeemable and deplorable, frankly, but that they were forgotten no longer. That was very important to his success. And polling needs to be a way that we capture that. And here's the thing about polling. I think the reason people don't understand Trump supporters, this was not a base election. 74 million people is not a base. So, and they consume, right? If you're a business person on this call, you need to understand these individuals. Maybe you don't have a relationship with them because we never truly deeply examine that which we truly disdain. And what are they doing? How do they spend their time? How do they spend their money? Who are they? Not in the voting booth every 2 to 4 years, but who are they? And how can we do a better job understanding them? And you know what, Frank, I'm all for unity and working together. I always have been. I'm somebody who had good relationships across the aisle. I won't reveal them, but I had Democratic members of Congress calling me directly. I would certainly socialize those calls within the White House, tell the chief of staff, tell the legislative director, tell the president when it was appropriate, or the vice president. But I'm somebody who showed up. I was often, the only Trump person not named, Trump or Kushner, maybe invited to something or showing up at something that was more democratic in nature in Washington, to try to show that it's a place of comedy, comity, and not always just comedy, comedy. So I believe in unity, but there's also going to be conflict and disagreement, because that's America. We were founded on that, and we're not going to unify on everything. It's not even possible. But we should find places where we can.
Wasn't Donald Trump too confrontational?
Was he too confrontational? I think Donald Trump is somebody who very much is very passionate about his agenda and what he believes in, and making sure that people hear it. I felt that it was beneath him, and told him plenty of times, to be arguing way too much with individual members of the media, only because he's the president. So I do think, again, there was a reasonable expectation that we had beginning with the president, that a campaign that got pretty fair, fair enough, reasonable coverage of the issues of what we were trying to accomplish, of what our strategy was. I was on TV every day saying, we're going back to Pennsylvania because it's a day of voting state. It has 20 electoral votes, and they don't have a tradition of early voting, and election day is November 8th, not November 3rd. We have extra time. So we had an audience for that, many audiences for that. And the president got outsized coverage. He got over $1 billion, maybe more, worth of free media. So the expectation was that you're at least going to have the same people covering what you're trying to do for the country. And when that sort of quickly fell apart, I do think the president can become very spirited about that. But the president is not confrontational for confrontation's sake. And the president is very passionate about certain things. We didn't agree on everything, but I think that's why we're very close. And I'm somebody who gave my counsel to him routinely and privately, and sometimes publicly. I never felt like I had to go on TV and speak to the audience at one. That's a ridiculous thing that people say. Maybe some people need to do that. I certainly didn't need to do that. But there are a couple of myths about Donald Trump, but one I think is very important, that he wants a bunch of yes men around him. No, he doesn't. He's like most chief executives I talk to. They abhor obsequiousness. You know why? Because then you never know what the person really thinks, and they're not being candid with you about things they're working on to move everything forward, to get some progress in your company or in your nonprofit or in the White House on behalf of the country. The president's bored with people who just tell him what they think he wants to hear. So he once said in the East Room, I think this is important, he once said in the East Room something that's absolutely true about his governing style, which is, he said, I like to watch them argue right in front of me. I like to watch them argue, fight it out. It's true. And some people are like, what? But that's good. I think it takes a very strong leader to surround him or herself with people of differing backgrounds and dissenting opinions. He had pro-lifers and pro-choicers in that White House. He had people who were, I would say, more protectionist, and people who were more pro-free trade. He had people who thought that the tax cut should be this and the tax cut should be that. He had people who disagreed on 5G. He had people who disagreed, but he knows that he and Mike Pence are the only two people whose names were on the ballot. And in the end, he would make the final decision, or not before hearing people out. Even when he disagreed with me, I told him, today I was the minority, but I was a vocal minority. And as long as the vocal part is there, I'm happy to be here on behalf of the country I love so much.
Should he have acknowledged that he lost his election before now?
So I think the president has every right um, to challenge to issue legal challenges as each state allows. And I think each state presented a very different question of law. I talked to people in Wisconsin early on. They felt they had independent people who felt they had two very legitimate questions of law that needed to be decided because of the way people voted this time, meaning like the change in the way people voted. I think, Frank, the biggest thing that probably surprised everyone is just that if we're fundamentally going to change the way most Americans vote, number one, you're going to get more Americans voting. And number two, possibly getting more Americans voting. And number two, that we're just, there's going to be some chaos. There's going to be some uncertainty. And it is curious to me that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, no Democrat ever complained about the new way we were going to vote. So I think that Republicans should have been, or I should say Trump voters should have been encouraged more to vote by mail. Bank those votes earlier on so that they're there. You're taking a huge chance that someone can get out of the house that day, or vote, or maybe they're on a business trip, maybe they didn't apply for absentee. So you're taking a big chance that they can vote even though they want to and crawl across broken glass, but that they physically can if you're only given that day to do it. So I think the president wanted to exhaust his legal challenges. And what I think that people, if Joe Biden, whereas Joe Biden is the victor, I think many of the spoils go to Donald Trump. And that seems very odd to say, but think about it. I want to go back to what I said. Not an early night, not a blue wave, not a Democratic Party who's comfortable with itself. It runs around saying, we're young, we're energetic, we're progressive. And they had as their nominee, Joe Biden. They just elected the same leadership, Hoyer, Schumer, Pelosi. They keep saying they're all these things, and then they don't really, it doesn't match when they have to go ahead and have leaders. And that's not an insult to any of them. It's not meant to be an insult. I was a very loud voice against the campaign's strategy of relentlessly mocking Joe Biden's age or his, the way he was speaking. I thought it was fair game, but I also thought it could alienate a lot of senior votes. And I said that time and again, publicly and privately. So that's not my point here. My point is to say that Donald Trump, that the Republican Party is Donald Trump's Republican Party. He's transformed the party, he's transformed the country. The Democratic Party, I don't know if anybody can say it's Joe Biden's party or it's Nancy Pelosi's party or Steny Hoyer or Chuck Schumer's party. I would challenge them. And I think they missed an opportunity again to get some sort of Midwestern members or Deep South members, people in swing states, people in swing districts. Tim Ryan has a great story, raised by a single mom, represents Mahoning or Canfield County or both. You have to pardon me, in Ohio, represents the working class. He challenged Nancy Pelosi before and didn't get many votes. I can name a number of people in the Democratic Party who probably would love to have their shot to prove that their party is actually young and energetic and progressive. But Donald Trump has unbelievable, if not unlimited opportunities in the coming months and years. He can run in 2024 if he wants, because every poll is going to say it's going to have the 2024 field, and you're going to see a lot of familiar names and wonderful public servants, male and female. And then it's going to say Trump 52%, Trump 65%, and everybody else in single digits or low double digits for a while. But he can also, the thing about Donald Trump that's different from other presidents is he just started in politics. A lot of those presidents, even much younger than him when they left the White House, President Obama, certainly President Carter, President Clinton, much younger than he. They were at the end of their political careers. He's at the beginning of his. And he still has a lot of work that he wants to do on behalf of the country. He feels there's a lot of unfinished business that he can help with. And so
do you think he should run?
I have no idea. What I think he should, I don't think he should announce. And I told him that when you announce you're running for office, you have to file papers, you have to open accounts, you have to do all these other things. What I think he should do is stay part of the conversation. And that doesn't mean, that means tweeting sparingly yet strategically. It means entering the conversation when you feel very, very deeply passionate committed about a particular issue. For example, if Secretary Kerry and and others in that administration, if they're going to go ahead and try to get us back in the JCPOA, if a President Biden wants to get us back in the JCPOA and President Trump wants to weigh in on that, he should. He should weigh in on that. He should say, look, folks, I protected our best friend, our ally in the region, Israel, and I protect the United States of America and everyone else by pulling us out of the JCPOA. I took on a nuclear capable Iran, and now you're going to go. Are you really that partisan? Are you really that spiteful toward me that you think you've got to erase that? I think those are the kind of things he can really, if they try to undo his deregulatory agenda, which helps so many property owners and small business owners and aspiring small business owners and taxpayers and farmers. If they try to roll back his rollback of dereg, if they try to stop these pipelines that are magnets for jobs. I mean, this president presided over energy dominance and job reduction, the likes of which we've never seen. We are now, for the first time in our nation's history, we are net exporter of natural gas and oil. And that's amazing. And so, again, I think it's be very appropriate for President Trump to weigh in where he sees a gutting of or a canceling of or a retraction of policies that he knows have helped many Americans.
Should he attend the inauguration?
I think so. I think it'd be great to see President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump there. But from what I understand, it's also not going to be an inauguration like the ones that we're used to seeing. But I will say this, the Obamas and the Clintons attended the inauguration last time. I was very happy to see them there. I had a conversation with former President, well, the only President Clinton will ever have, Bill Clinton, afterward. It happened to be my 50th birthday. I'm born January 20th, 1967. So inauguration day was my birthday. And when President Trump made me campaign manager, Frank, I said, okay, well, this is a great omen. We either have the birthday party of a lifetime or I'll take the kids to Italy. And my kids still haven't been to Italy. So there you go. We had a great party. But President Clinton engaged me in conversation as he was leaving the rotunda that day after the lunch in the Capitol. And we had a very polite conversation. I was hoping we could get their help. I was hoping we can get more help from either, President and First Lady Obama or their senior team. And we didn't, did we? And so I think if you attend an inauguration, it's fine. But are you also willing to do the work to help the next president? And I don't think it's Donald Trump should be the only person asked that. I worked in the same building for 4 years that Joe Biden worked in for 8. And I saw firsthand things that didn't get done. We're never even touched, right? We're never even attempted that. And some things not done well, some things done well, but some things not even attempted. Sort of a lack of courage or a lack of, I should say, an inability to overcome the sclerosis that infects, political Washington, if you will. We can't do that because no one's ever tried it, or this person will get mad, or that union will be upset, or that group will be upset. And that was very liberating for Donald Trump. I think the volume and velocity with which Donald Trump operated was neck-breaking for many, and certainly not sustainable for even people who worked with him and for him for a while. But it was good for the country when he would say with some alacrity and urgency, we need to get this done. We need to get that. No, we're not going to wait on the tax cut. No, we're not going to wait on surging the PPE supplies because people are saying we just can't make gowns that quickly. We can't make gloves that quickly. We can't make ventilators that quickly. And I'll say, well, you got to figure it out. We're America. And they did figure it out. The cupboards were bare. And I'm told, I don't know the latest numbers because I'm not there and I haven't asked in a while, but I was told that we'd have about 100,000 ventilators in our strategic national stockpile by year's end, by the end of 2020. And everybody who needed a ventilator got a ventilator. That's the sort of that's the work that you have to do. That's when you have a businessman who's not bound by Washington Convention, like we can't do it. We need to sign that. We need to study this. We need a commission for that. People were suffering and people were dying and they needed ventilators. And one governor that we all know requested 14,000 ventilators. We sent 12% that number. No, requested 44,000 ventilators. We sent 12% of that number and they ended up sharing them with other states, which is a great thing. But we sourced the need not the ask. But every state, and I sat on those governor's calls, Frank, and this is why, going back to that earlier question about how will history treat him, I sat on those governor's calls, usually run by the vice president, but often, often the president would participate, particularly early on. And the same governors, thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you, because FEMA called us and the National Guard's coming in. Our nursing homes have what they need. Thank you for the PPP. Thank you for the CARES Act. Thank you. Thank you so much for the testing capacity ramp up. Thank you for making Dr. Fauci available. Thank you for making Brett Shawar available. On and on and on. And then they go on a cable station and they basically lose their minds about Donald Trump. It was really sad to see because I thought it was such a great moment of unity. The president had a 61% approval rating on his handling of the pandemic in March or April. If you go back and look at Gallup.
2 more questions. If Saturday Night Live asks you to go on, would you do it? If 60 Minutes asks to interview you and one of the producers from 60 Minutes is on this call right now, would you do SNL and would you do 60 Minutes?
Well, my answer for that, well, first of all, thank you. My answer to that is what my answer has been all along, which is that if I can add something, and if I can add something to the conversation, if I can add something, if I can reach someone or a lot of people in a way that's helpful, mainly to them, or mainly, I guess, to this whole idea of unity and being able to be self-deprecating. I went from self-denying as a kid to, self-deprecating. And so long as it's not sort of self-immolating, it's a good thing. So sure, but it really depends on, I guess it also depends on what is the content. I mean, I watch both of those shows. I enjoy both of those shows. I learn from both of those shows. And so the answer, of course, would be yes, if it were, if it were the right circumstance. But I'm also somebody who I've never asked for anything like that. I've never invited myself on anything like that. And so, but I do think having diversity of voices is important to our body politic. And that goes back, Frank, to what my initial objection was when I got to the White House. And my objection is now that I left the White House, which is it's very easy to find biased coverage. Everybody can say that's not fair and this is biased and but you know what? That's like saying, does that piece of meat have, a tumor on it? Why would you eat it? I mean, that's like, it's obvious to people if they're looking for it. Like, oh, I think Rachel Maddow's biased. I think Sean Hannity's biased. Or I think Sean Hannity hung the moon. I think Rachel Maddow hung the moon. I mean, that's going to be in the eye of the beholder. What's more difficult is the insidious drip by drip, incomplete coverage. It's the stories that are never told. It's the voices that are never heard. And if we're all just trying to go for kicks and clicks, and if people are just going for, not those shows, I'm just saying, if we're in a kicks and clicks atmosphere and people think Twitter is an assignment editor, let alone an editor, they think it's real, they think it's accurate, they think that if somebody posted it there, then they can write a whole story about it, then we are denying the best of America. Because as you and I know, as professional focus group moderators, some of the absolutely most spectacular, outstanding, usable, transformative, magnificent ideas I've ever heard in my career have come from people. They've thought this through. They're not cynical. They're not jaundiced. They thought this through. And I look down at the sheet, $50,000 household income a year. I'm thinking that is one of my friend's latte and dry cleaning bill. And that's their household income. And they have wisdom that the rest of us frankly lack. And so that's the gift that I'm given and the gift you've been given over the course of our careers, which is when you're forced to get out of New York or Washington or any of the big cities and go and talk to the people. How's it playing in Peoria? The famous question was, we're the ones who got on the prop plane to go ask them, weren't we? And so when you sit among people for so long, you don't disdain them. You delight in their company. You respect them. You learn from them. You sort of lock arms with them. And they so enjoy being asked what they think and how they feel, because nobody ever does. Stop at this red light. Don't eat that. Sign this paper. Go get my coffee. Where are my shoes, Mom? Did you do your homework? They're being told constantly what to do. And then all of a sudden somebody says, what do you think? You're important. Tell me how you feel. And that is something I would say, particularly to a news program like 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes came and interviewed me for a piece they were going to do that they never ran about the drug crisis. And I was sort of disappointed because I thought it was a really great opportunity to tell Americans about Narcan and naloxone and what they can do to reverse overdoses because the Surgeon General, for the first time in 13 years, put out an advisory. And the advisory, for the first time in 13 years, so that spanned 3 presidencies, right? For the first time, the advisory was that all of us should be carrying naloxone and Narcan on our person so that we can help people reverse an overdose, and that's as easy to use as an EpiPen or an inhaler. And I thought it was really a very clever, well, it's a phenomenal advisory, but I thought it was a very clever piece they were working on. So yes, I just want to be part of the conversation, and I think that we should respect that we are a divided country, but that doesn't mean that half of the country is wrong and stupid and foolish. It means that we are a divided country who has to find some ways to work together on some things, and then has to be really proud of our differences of opinion and respectful toward them. And I'm always shocked that the same people will say, I'm open-minded, I'm evolved, I'm you spend a little bit of time reading their Twitter feed, or you spend a little time listening to them, or you see them avert their gaze away from people that don't agree with them. And you wondered, just because you say it doesn't make it true. Remember, I told my 8-year-old daughter at the time that just because somebody says it doesn't make it true, but that's true of criticism, but it's also true of puffery. I said to her at the time, abracadabra, did your homework get done because you said my homework got done, or did you have to sit down and actually do it? So things just doesn't happen because we say it. But Frank, remember what I said. I can't see you. I haven't been able to see you since somebody was calling me. I hope you could see me. But I'll tell you, Frank, I also just want us to all focus when I said also, like, we're a country whose one of our major divisions that doesn't get studied enough is people who literally spend most of their day online. It's where they have their relationships. It's where they order their food. It's where they work. And this is pre-pandemic. That's distorted it a bit for sure. So just follow me for a second. And then people who live mostly offline. And we get our sources of information in different places. One thing I'm really very pleased with President Trump about is I think he has changed what we accept, if not expect, from our president, meaning the democratization of information. He has really allowed so many more people to access democracy. They don't need to pay money. They don't need to be insiders like you and me. They don't need to run for office. All they need to do is have a phone or a computer, and they can get the same presidential communication at the same time. I always say Donald Trump needs to tweet like we need to eat. It's just about better choices. Sometimes I finish the brownie pan. Sometimes I have a kale salad. It all equals out.
Okay, well, that is a great way to end this. He needs to tweet the way you and I need to eat, and you know how much I need to eat. I want people on this call, on this video, to know that Kellyanne Conway is the best communicator. Whether you like what she says or not, you've heard the phrases, you've heard the metaphors, the language that she uses, the style that she uses, the fact that she, unlike people like me, don't trip up. There is a poetry to your communication and an effectiveness that surpasses anyone in either party. I will tell you that when I invited you on this, I got a whole bunch of people who emailed me, texted me, complaining about it. And I told them, don't show up. If you are that narrow-minded that you've got nothing to lose and nothing to learn, don't show up. That I care as much. If you don't care about her point of view, then I don't care about yours. And I really need to, and by the way, the producer of 60 Minutes just said, we'd be happy to have you on 60 Minutes to tell your story, and he literally, I'm reading the note right here. So you are actually officially being invited on 60 Minutes. I'm glad to see that these calls have a purpose.
Well, Frank, this has been called 75 minutes, but go ahead, keep going.
I know.
I heard you paying me by the word, so thank you.
Yes, it's Joe Biden is so old it takes him an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes. That's the joke I always tell. You're the best at what you do.
No, I appreciate that. I learned from the best. I mean, in my early career, I want people to know it was you and Raul Fernandez, who is a superstar in a different field, who were just I think most encouraging, but also opened doors for me and helped me get over my awkwardness. And I feel like you weren't awkward. But also, I mean, people should know, Frank, when I went to work for you, I had just gotten a law degree and clerked for a judge in Washington, D.C. And I had already accepted an offer at a law firm, a litigation firm in downtown D.C., where I had been a summer associate, where I was excited to start my work. And you convinced me to come with you that it would be different and it would be unconventional. And you were all those. And I'm always grateful. I was underpaid, but I was overvalued by you. And I think that that doesn't always happen for women. I'm just teasing you about the underpaid part.
Well,
You,
if you
you,
want to, if
you
you want
made
to make it up to me, if you want to make it up to me, then you give me 10% of all the speaking fees, because I know very well how much you're getting, how much you're going to get, and
I'll do
how
that.
well,
I'll make your favorite bolognese. How's that? I think you'd appreciate that more than money.
actually
But
you're,
Frank, thank you. And thanks for continuing to inspire. I think you're one of those people who doesn't need to work, doesn't need the crap you get, and you continue to plod forward against a lot of jealous ankle biters out there because you're inspiring you're probably teaching the kids of the kids that you taught at Penn and elsewhere a long time ago at this point, because I was in those classes with you and as a substitute and as your apprentice. And so you have to keep doing it. I mean, even when people want to change their careers, if they retire and want to stay fresh in something, they should really, in my view, really think about how they can bring more people along. The thing that surprised me the most, as somebody, again, who wasn't born with it, wasn't born into it, the thing that surprised me the most was how many people you can reach through different form. And it's not always just a TV show or something like this, but you can reach so many different people. And there's somebody there who hears the message that either, sure, a lot of people get angry and say, why, the evolved people say, why do you have them? But so many more people that you would never expect say, I love this phrase, or I'm going to go look that up, or you know what, now I feel a little bit more confident about X. And I think those who are very blessed, like we are, who have done very well in our careers, we and life, we have an obligation to bring more people. I wouldn't even say next generation, more people along, and that's just going to be a pleasure in my post-presidency life to be able to do that as well. I'm going to take my drug work outside of the White House with me and continue with that, and do some consulting, some communicating. But first and foremost, I left for my kids. I'm working on this book. It's going to be really fun. And I thank you, Frank, for being a big part of my life. Thank you. And thanks for showing the better picture of us. We look great.
I want to thank everyone for coming on, and I will leave them with this, because Kellyanne, you can't see it, but I put us
Yeah.
back on again, because I can't believe I was ever that young. I can't believe I was ever that thin, and you have not changed at all. So thank you for doing this. We all appreciate it.
Thank you. God bless
Anybody?
everyone. Happy holidays to everyone. Take care.
We are done. Thank you all very much.